Welcome to Launchpad, the unique radio show and podcast that celebrates new book releases and the authors that created them. Now, let's take off with your host, Grace Sammon.
Welcome to episode 7 of Launchpad. I'm your host, Grace Sammon, and on behalf of the author marketing coach, Mary Helen Sheriff, I could not be more happy to have everyone with us tonight. If you're joining us live on one of our Facebook channels, please feel free to leave your comments in the chat, ask questions in the chat, and basically just have a wonderful time with us. And I have to tell you, buckle up for this episode, because on this episode, we have secrets and assassins, dentists and doctors, wives of multiple kinds, trips through Asia, reckless choices, past decisions, and sagas and serials. Welcome to the Launchpad microphone. I'd like to start tonight with introducing you to our guests. Tonight we have JOSIE Brown, author of The Housewife Assassin, wonderful Lovelace cook, Meet Me in Dubai. Her book is not quite out yet, but we're excited it will be. BUKOWSKI, A Week of Warm Weather. And last and not least, DEBRA Green, The Convention of Wives. Welcome to each of you tonight. How are you?
Fine.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you. JOSIE, let's start with you. Tell us about your newest book, because you have written so many of them.
This is the 22nd novel in my Housewife Assassin series, and it's called Manners, Missiles, and Mayhem. And in this particular novel, the protagonist, who's Donna Stone Craig, and her mission team, which includes her husband, Jack, are shadowing a Russian spy who has gained access to several of the Air Force's bases that are integral to our country's missile defense system. As it turns out, the boyfriend of the Craig's eldest daughter, Mary, owns the company that designed its security software. So those of you who are following the books will see a lot of him as well as a lot of Mary, because she is an intern with Congress, and it just so happens that she is working for a liaison of the NSA. So it's a lot of intrigue and a lot of spy stuff and a lot of fun, and I go all over the country with it.
And ripped from our headlines in many times, aren't they?
Yes, this one particularly.
That'll be great. And we'll hear more about you and your other books in just a bit. Let's pop to Lee Bukowski, who's just written a fabulous book, A Week of Warm Weather.
Right. So JOSIE, you've only written 21 more books in that series than I have altogether. So don't, no need to show off. No, thank you. So A Week of Warm Weather is my debut novel, and it is a fiction novel. It is about a woman who has suffered a trauma in her childhood, and whether she knows it or not, she has buried that trauma. And then as a young wife and mother, she is in a marriage where her husband begins to behave very strangely, very dangerously. And so that resurrects this trauma from her childhood. And it kind of sets her on this path where she has to not only figure out what to do about her husband, but to kind of go back and revisit this trauma and figure out how it plays into these situations that she's gotten herself into. So it really deals with, generational trauma, breaking that cycle of generational trauma, all sorts of, codependency and family secrets and lies and all of that good stuff.
It does sound like great stuff. Lovelace, tell us about Meet Me in Mumbai.
Mumbai. Well, I tell you what, this is a story of one woman's journey. And Jessie turned 62, and she's decided her life is boring, and she's horrified. So she implores the universe to get her out of her comfort zone. And it's always, you may want to be specific when you ask the universe for something, but the universe delivers an Englishman in her life, and she's sophisticated. He loves wild camping. He had traveled in India, and he dares her to meet him in Mumbai. They've fallen in love. They've spent almost a year together, and he says, "Come to India." She has no idea what she's up for, but it is truly a fish out of water story. It's a mashup of I won't even the movies. Some of the movies are so old, but India becomes almost a character in the book, and the book is written in 4 parts. So it's the first section is India. The second, after they survive 3 months in India, and their relationship is still intact, remarkably. Trevor invites Jessie, my protagonist, to meet him in Cornwall. An accident occurs a few days into the walking tour, and a 1-month trip extends to 3 months. But a secret's revealed. I love the idea that we're talking about secrets. A secret is revealed that throws everything into a real throws a monkey wrench in the whole thing. So Jessie tells Trevor she never wants to see him again, and we should never say never. They reunite and decide they're going to go on a 7-month odyssey through India, and things go pretty well initially in India. And while they're there, they're so close to Asia. Why don't we go to Southeast Asia? Now, these are two seniors, and they initially started traveling like two 20-year-olds on a gap year. Now they've graduated from that shoestring to a bootstring. Once again, something comes up where Jessie understands that maybe there's been an untruth. And, she has to decide how to deal with it. Has she grown? How is she going to deal with this? And I think it's a novel of someone discovering themselves and how meeting and loving someone on travel can truly change your whole outlook on life and change everything in your life.
Well, we'll be talking more about travel and secrets right after we hear from Deborah Green with her new novel, A Convention of Wives.
Thanks so much for having me, Grace, and so nice to be here with everyone. The Convention of Wives is a story of two friends, Dina and Julia, who meet when they are young wives and new mothers, and they are at a medical conference with their two surgeon husbands, complaining about their husbands' hours and the need for them to be so independent. And the story follows their friendship for about 30 years and their marriages and the struggles within all of those relationships. In addition to the contemporary story, it flashes back into the history of both of these women's families. And one of the themes of the book, one of the overriding themes, is that we are not just who we are when we're born. We carry with us the weight, the background of our families, genetically, psychologically, traditionally, traumatically, in all different ways. So we really can never escape that. The story has some secrets, and it is more than just a story of love and romance. It captures the current friendship of the women, the future friendship of the women, and complications within their families, and a secret that emerges.
Well, we have lots of secrets, lots of families, and lots of wives tonight. So we've got a lot to talk about. I want to welcome our listeners. Barbara Conry is with us, who says hello and things sound great. Michelle Ann Waite is lovely. Suzanne Simonetti, who I had the pleasure of speaking with yesterday, says a special hello to Lee. And Lovelace, Barbara Conry says she will be checking out your book.
You.
So it's just wonderful to have people from our Facebook community with us as well. So thank you. Please keep your comments coming and your questions coming. I'd like to talk a little bit about family dynamics. And Josie, I'd like to start with you because housewife assassin, there's a lot going on in that family.
Yeah, there is. In the 22 books, they have extended over a period of 10 years. The oldest child was 12, Mary, and then Jeff was 2 years behind her, both in middle school. He was 10. And then, of course, there's little Trisha, and she was right at preschool, about to enter kindergarten. But what's happened over the years is, you have a woman who finds out that her husband was a black ops assassin after he dies, and she takes his place. So the books have carried through. The books came out of my own fear factor of what was happening in our world as far as, espionage. And it all happened after, I'm an after 9/11 mom. So I kind of internalized that. And as a mom, you always want to take control. And I wanted to take control of the world. And I felt like, well, through her, I can do it. I mean, personally, I'm afraid of fire, water, and heights. But Donna is not afraid of anything. And she has her own vulnerabilities. I mean, she has a very deep backstory. So it goes back and forth throughout all the books. You see her family life and how the kids pretty much figure out eventually that their mom is not the average mom. And they also figure out that the man in her life is not an average guy either. Matter of fact, they think he's their dad, but he's not. So that's been a lot of fun in how that came out throughout the series, and also how it follows through. And now that the oldest has just turned 18, you know, she's getting out of high school. She has this chance at an internship. So we see them grow, and everybody loves the fact that the kids are growing along with the stories, and their involvement is piecemeal, but it explains a lot to the reader too, as to why Donna keeps moving forward with what she has to do in life and in the government.
And I love that your characters grow in age as you have progressed over this time. Deborah, you talk about secrets. Why don't you go there for us?
Well, I think what's interesting in the novel is that there's a parallel between what the women are going through in today's world and what their ancestors did. And in every generation, there are secrets. You know, whether someone suddenly finds out, as Josie alluded to, someone they think is their father is not their father, or there's a hidden love at some point in someone's life. And with current technology and genetics, a lot of people have recently discovered many of these secrets. Some of it is good. Some of it is a surprise you never really wanted to hear about. So those are the kinds of things that occur in the Convention of Wives that everyone winds up dealing with and coming to terms with in the end.
Thank you. Lee, secrets, important in your book.
Oh, yes, very important. And both of those, as I was listening to you, all three of you talk about your books, which all sound fabulous. The family dynamic is huge in my book, particularly mother-daughter relationships, mother-child relationships, because even the husband in my book, there's a dynamic there that existed with his mother who is deceased. And so it's not just my protagonist, Tessa's relationship with her biological mother, with her stepmother, who she really considers her mother. But then she has young children of her own. And so then there's that dynamic. And so as Deborah was saying, you know, we don't just come into this world as a blank slate. I mean, I think we kind of all think of that we do, but we really don't, because we really are a product of our families and our upbringing and our culture. And that whatever that family dynamic is that you are born into, in my book, Tessa is very connected to her family. She's Italian, and she's got a big family, and they are very, very close. And so, and then getting on to the secrets, I think that one of the things that I really realized as I was writing is that part of it, I think, is that we're so much more evolved now, right? So things that we would have been secret forever, even not that long ago, 30, 40, maybe 50 years ago, we talk about now, but we didn't then. And so I think that's how sometimes these things that happen became secrets, and you grow up with those secrets. And if you don't deal with them and you don't talk about them, that's where that cycle of generational trauma really becomes important. And it's important then for someone at some point has to say, wait a minute, if these secrets, I think there's a saying, even, we're only as sick as our secrets. And some secrets I think are worth keeping, just to put that out there. I think sometimes if it's a secret that, maybe is just better left, maybe buried, or not necessarily buried, but that maybe it's better if it doesn't come out. But in most cases, that's not true. And so secrecy, that's a big part of my book in terms of Tessa and what she has buried and the secrets in her family that haven't been dealt with. And that's where it's really sort of a coming of age in that way, and that acknowledging of, if she doesn't acknowledge what's happened and these secrets that have been kept, and then she's going to pass it on, and she realizes that she's going to then subject her own children to that same generational trauma.
Absolutely. And I want to switch quickly to Lovelace Cook, but I also want to recognize that people are loving the concept of secrets. I'm absolutely shocked that Barbara Conry, USA Today bestseller, who just released a book called My Secret to Keep, thinks secrets is a great idea. That's absolutely shocking to all of us. And Michelle Ann Waite thinks it's so important to talk about this idea of family dynamics and finding family members. That comment is particularly to you, Deborah, and maybe we can cycle back to that in a minute. But Lovelace, your book is not so much about secrets, but it's certainly about relational dynamics. Talk more about how that works in your book.
Well, sometimes not very well. When opposites attract, I think that's, I love that dynamic, and coming from very different backgrounds, where people have certain expectations. Just, for example, Trevor's background is that he grew up in post-World War II London, really playing on a bombed out, a bomb site. I mean, right across the street from a bomb site. And over time, Jesse learns about his life, which is one of more or less deprivation, how the difficulties in post-war World War II England. However, Jesse has had a completely different, upbringing, and is educated, has had an opportunity for a great career. They're very different in terms of their backgrounds. There's one little moment in the book where Jessie is talking with one of her mother's friends, and her mother's friend said, your mother fell in love with an RAF correspondent who was at Maxwell Air Force Base. And so I think knowing that, Jessie why don't I fall in love with an Englishman? So, fools rush in. What can I say?
So I want to switch a little bit from your stories to your storytelling. And thank you, Nina, for joining us. She was saying that it's no secret that all of these stories sound wonderful.
Oh, so she's my friend. So thank you for joining. It's actually Nina, but thank you so much for joining.
So I want to hold with the idea of how we became storytellers. Each of us have come from very, very different places. Deborah, let's start with you. How did you become a storyteller?
So I like to say that I think for everyone, our first storytellers are our parents, for most of us, whether they're reading us a book in the evening before we go to bed, or they're making up stories for us before we go to bed. And my parents were both fantastic storytellers. My mom in particular told my brother and myself a story every night about a group called the Chicken People. And she would make this up every night and leave us hanging, a cliffhanger, so that we close our eyes and go to sleep. And it wasn't until years later that I understood the generation of the Chicken People. And that was, to cut it a little bit short, my mom was born in Berlin, Germany, and was a Kindertransport child. And when she was taken to England to live with an aunt and uncle, they raised chickens in the backyard. And her job was to feed the chickens and clean the chickens and collect the eggs. But every Friday, in preparation for the Sabbath, her aunt would pick a chicken, and that was that. And then my mother was handed the chicken, and my mother had to pluck the chicken. So I like to think that the Chicken People stories was her way of giving her friends, her pets, a different ending than what she actually saw happen. And my dad was a real kibitzer, a jokester, used to go into a restaurant, put a napkin on his arm and go table to table and explain the entrees and the cocktails to total strangers. And we would be completely appalled and embarrassed. And he loved it. So I think that love of storytelling and just being able to entertain people in some ways came from my parents. And I really enjoyed storytelling and reading stories from a very early age.
Oh, I want a whole children's book series about the Chicken People. That's right. Lovelace and I are like, we want to read this.
Right. I'll make a note.
It may be one of my best our parents gave us stories. So Deborah, thank you for that. Josie, you have been a journalist, a playwright, traditionally published, indie published, a novelist. How did you become such a storyteller?
Well, it started, my parents also were voracious readers and read to us. And I learned how to read by following my mother while she was mowing the lawn. I would walk behind her reading a book and out loud, because you were supposed to read out loud. Of course, she couldn't hear a word I was saying. So everything I read was okay. And I was making it up. No, I never made it up. But my sister and I used to go to bed. We shared rooms in twin beds. And we had this story going called Phyllis and the Little Girl. Now, I don't know who Phyllis was or the little girl, but I do remember that we would tell each other this story. It would be like a serialized story about what was happening to Phyllis and the little girl. So that kind of grew, and then I watched a lot of Perry Mason. So that was my love of mysteries. But yes, I started out in advertising. I segued over to journalism. And then I was working with a client that was really a big client. And we were taking a walk one day and she said, "What do you really want to do?" And I said, "I want to write a novel." And she goes, "So just do it. Just do it." And of course, that was the gauntlet thrown, and I picked it up, and I was deadline oriented, so it worked out for me. I could do it.
Okay, I now want a whole nother children book series, which is the hardest genre, right? But can't everybody just see Josie with her bangs, walking after her mom, reading out loud like Madeline? This is fabulous. Now, Lee, you're a teacher now turning full-time novelist. Tell us about your journey to being a storyteller.
Yes. So I am. I like to say I'm a recovering 7th grade English teacher. I still do teach part-time at the university level, but I think also, just like Deborah and Josie talked about, storytelling in my family was very big. As I come from a very large family. And so I just always remember, you sitting around the table, always usually on Sunday, and, telling stories. And there's several that just come up even to this day that are decades old. And even to this day, my dad, who is now in his 80s, he'll sit and still tell us stories, or he'll remember things as we drive around, an area where we don't maybe go that often. And he'll tell stories about, when he was young or he was in school. I mean, he can remember things when he was in grade school, and you know how it is. You can't remember what happened this morning, but you can remember things from, 70, 80 years ago. And I was all, and so that was always a big part of my life. But then, I've always been an avid reader. And I'm sure, which is what made me go into teaching English and teaching writing. But I think I think I always would lose myself in books. And so I really went to my books as, that is where I would go. That's kind of my respite, still is. And then I think as I can't say that I am one of those, some people say I've always wanted to write a novel. And I don't know that I can say that, but I think that as I kind of went through my adulthood and had some, tumultuous times and, some turbulence, as many of us do, I think in the same way that I turned to reading as my respite and kind of that outlet, I think I then decided to turn to writing for the same reason, as really, I thought, what, I think now I have a story to tell. I think I can put together a story. I think I've lived enough life. I have enough life experience. I don't know, as a much younger woman, that I would have really been able to write a novel with the kind of depth that I would want. And so I think really, just like Deborah and Josie were just talking about, it starts, with your family and a love of reading and love of storytelling. And then I think just, life happens. And for me, all of that really sort of culminated in, I think I have a story to tell now, and I would really like to do this.
And, I think you point out a thing that I believe is very truly, for me, even though I've written 3 other books before I wrote my novel, I don't think I had the life experience to do the novel part. And that's not taking away from any of the other people who have been writing for generations and
Right.
doing beautiful work. I just know that for me, I needed that life experience under my belt.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Yeah, and I'm so excited that Betty Koval has joined us. She is a fabulous supporter of authors, and many people call her Cousin Betty. So thank you for joining us. Lovelace, you have had a long history in storytelling, writing, podcasting, TV, magazines. Talk about your path to storytelling, please.
Well, it started out pretty early, where I think, like most people, my mother used to tell my brother and me stories. she would read to us every evening, and she told us stories. And whenever she would read, we'd always say, Mama, tell us a story out of your mouth. We didn't know where the stories were coming from. So that kind of inspired me when my brother and I were pretty close, but I decided to talk about or make up this adventure of Junior and Susie going into space. Now, I'm not sure exactly, there must have been Buck Rogers or something on the television that inspired that. I wanted to write really from, like Lee, once I learned to read, I kind of disappeared from the family. I just lost my train of thought there, disappearing. However, I started writing really early, and I think one of the things that I recall was a cowboy story that I wrote, and I probably was 9 or 10, and it was terrible. So, I've journaled, I've written poetry, I've written songs. I've had a totally non-linear life, which I think probably because of all the experiences has contributed to coming out of my shell and being able to talk with people. And I've had a lot of experiences, Grace. So that started it all, but I've always wanted to write. So, I've got piles of stuff that are, boxes of junk stuff.
Good stories. Good stories. Lee, I want to go back to you. Let's talk a little bit about genre, and let's talk a little bit about, especially because it's a debut novel, and we can't ask Josie this because she's written 9 million novels, but let's talk about genre, and let's talk about how autobiographical are any of our characters. Lee.
So my book, it is a fiction novel, but parts of it are, I would say, have that memoir thread. There are parts of it, there are storylines, and also characters based on either my life or people I know. And then there are other parts and storylines that are completely made up. But I think it's not that all that uncommon for a debut author. I say kind of pick apart your life. And as I said, it was my life experience that really got me thinking about putting together a novel. So, I kind of, I think you sort of pick your life apart and, kind of throw it all in a pile, and then you start to pull threads of that out, and, well, this could be part of it and this could be part of it, but this is made up. And so, mine definitely has autobiographical threads, but then again, there are pieces of it that are completely made up.
Thank you, Deborah.
I would have to say ditto to what Lee said. There definitely are pieces of it that are autobiographical. I'm married to a surgeon. I've dealt with long hours and being alone, and made friendships that were very supportive of times. But as in the novel, I've also experienced issues with female friendship, also stresses within marriage. And I think most of us at this age have gone through similar things. So some of that was translated directly into the novel. And although there isn't a person who is particularly real, there really are composites of people. There are a few characters that are more real than others. For example, there's an older woman, Sylvia, this does not give away the plot in any way, who once gave me a fascinating history tour of Barbados. And I parodied her as a character in the novel. And in fact, it wasn't until I was really ready for the novel to be released that I realized I didn't change her name. So at some point I had to sort of warn her that she was in the novel, gave her a copy, suggested strongly that she read it. Sure. And wanted to make sure she wasn't insulted, because I tried to make her a little bit more strange and entertaining than she actually is in real life.
That works. And I cannot believe we're almost out of time. So I want to go quickly to Lovelace about the autobiographical question. And then Josie, I'm just going to let you bring us home with whatever you want around this topic.
Okay.
Lovelace.
Well, I really did take a trip to India at 63 and had never been there and was complete fish out of water. Are there characters within the book? There are things that are made up. There are things that are, as people have said, composites. So I'll wrap it up with that. But yeah, it comes from a real experience.
And I think I'm very jealous of that. I would not have been adventurous enough to do it, but I'm jealous that you did it. Josie, genre, you write so many.
Yeah, well, in my women's fiction books, my editor once asked me how I met my husband. And I said, well, I was in the backyard with a girlfriend, and their next door neighbors were also in their backyard cooking steaks while we were cooking hamburgers. And she called them the perfect couple. And I had just turned in a book called Secret Lives of Husbands and Wives. And my editor said, so, how'd you meet your husband? And I said, this is how. And she goes, that's what you just wrote. Because in my mind, I'd never written about us. But yes, I met my husband because his wife left him, which happened in Secret Lives of Husbands and Wives. And, we just fell in love. And that happens in the book, but it happens over a long period of time, and it's with the neighbor, the woman who actually lives next door. So not next door, but in the neighborhood. So
a little bit of autobiographical in all of our works. Yeah. I want to thank each and every one of you for being with us. Deborah Green, hold up your amazing book, The Convention of Wives. Thank you for being with us tonight. Lee BUKOWSKI with your fabulous book, Week of Warm Weather. Josie Brown with the Housewife Assassin series. Lovelace Cook with her book, which is not quite out yet, but we're pretty excited about Meet Me in Mumbai. Ladies, gentlemen, Facebook friends, I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight on behalf of myself, Mary Helen Sheriff. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Launchpad, fell in love with a new author, found a new book, and thanks for coming to the Launchpad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We enjoyed having everybody here with us tonight, and thanks again.
This episode is copyrighted by Grace Sammon and Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Thank you for visiting with us on Launchpad.